It's that special time of the year, when the scrape of autumn leaves on the concrete reminds you that the barrier between the spirit world and our own has become more porous. Here at Tanuki Games, we'll be releasing a new video every week in celebration of the macabre, weird, or downright strange. From goofy to eerie, Spooky Tanuki Games has you covered for the entire month of October. The theme for this year is something that all gamers fear, their stockpile of unplayed games. That's right, this year's terrifying topic is Tales from the Backlog. Let's take a look at this week's fright-filled feature, shall we?
Whoever made this must be crazy.
When Swery was creating Deadly Premonition, it seemed like a certain set of the gaming community was moving towards more abstract, inventive games that would challenge gamers' assumptions of what a video game could be. The first major game like this was Suda51's Killer 7. This seemed to be the future of the medium, or at least a corner of it. In that same tradition, Deadly Premonition was a wildly ambitious game that is now easy to mock, but is in fact an important and, dare I say, good game. Now the video game landscape doesn't have much room for a game like Deadly Premonition. It isn't refined enough in its gameplay. However, with all of these deficits, it is indeed a classic. Deadly Premonition began development back in the mid-aughts, with the working title as Rainy Woods. The game was cancelled, revived, and ultimately released in 2010 exclusively for the Xbox 360. In 2013, a director's cut of Deadly Premonition was re-released on the PS3 and PC. I'll be reviewing the PS3 version. Let's see what our coffee tells us, shall we?
There's definitely something in this town. Do you feel it, Zach? My coffee warned me about it.
Deadly Premonition follows a young detective from the FBI, York. I'll let him do his own introductions.
FBI Special Agent Francis York Morgan. And you are?
He's been called into a rural town in Washington named Greenvale. York has been chasing a murderer across the country, and he thinks his latest victim is in the sleepy town of Greenvale. Upon arriving, he meets all sorts of quirky inhabitants and psychopathic denizens of the town. If all this sounds familiar, you'd be recalling another classic supernatural thriller. This is essentially the setup for Twin Peaks. While most of the characters in Deadly Premonition have an allegory in Twin Peaks, and a significant amount of screen time is given to coffee,
Ah, Zach, this is amazing. Even the taste of her coffee is thrilling, to say the least.
What?
No, nothing.
Deadly Premonition is its own beast. One example is the character Zach, York's partner of sorts.
Oh, one thing. Please don't ask me about Zach. That's a private matter.
York is constantly talking through the case with Zach, even though Zach may or may not be real. Then there's the Sheriff George and his subordinates, Thomas and Emily. George is a stereotypical man's man, and Thomas is not.
Cut the poetic rubbish, Harry, and tell us what you know. We can force you to talk, you know.
Pleasure to meet you, Agent Morgan. We've been expecting you.
Emily serves as a great foil to all the energy within the group.
We'd all have halos by now if I was driving.
The supporting cast is equally fascinating and diverse. The crew that York meets along the way are interesting and, most importantly, well-developed. The writing in Deadly Premonition is superb. While it sometimes comes off a bit inauthentic, you'll definitely identify with the citizens of Greenvale.
But I did all this for her. I started out delivering because I wanted the extra cash. But you know, things like this change over time. As you can see, her family is loaded, and I live in a trailer house. She's out of my league, you know? And so I...
The strength of the writing is best exemplified with York and Zach. York likes to chat about movies with Zach, and I love these in-between moments as York drives from place to place.
Speaking of 80s movies, one jewel in the rough springs to mind. Deadly Spawn. Do you remember that one, Zach?
The town of Greenvale is as much a part of the cast as any other character. As you play through the story, you'll begin to view the town as a part of the tale. You'll start to think, should I go to the A&G diner for a quick slice of pie? I wonder who's there now. Do you think it's going to rain tonight? There are some very surreal moments during the story that take place in either a red or white room as well. These rooms are not in the real world, but reality affects them. There's a lot of fan theories as to the symbolism of these spaces. What I can say is that they're representations of what York sees in Greenvale. If you keep an eye out, you'll start to notice that things you see in one place will crop up in another. The Red World is also where York must fight zombies, I think they're zombies, in order to find more clues to solve the case. It's easy to write off Deadly Premonition with other cult classic TV shows, but it does have one major distinguishing characteristic: a coherent story that knows where it's going from the very beginning. In the case of Twin Peaks, it never really had a plan for solving the mystery of who killed Laura Palmer. Sure, it was a wild ride, but it didn't have a destination. Deadly Premonition has a mystery that you can deduce who the killer is based on evidence and circumstance. Deadly Premonition has become a bit of a meme over the last several years, but one thing that can't be understated, beyond all of the kitsch, is that it is a scary game. The antagonist, the Raincoat Killer, is truly intimidating. He almost seems to have supernatural powers. However, as York, the player isn't running away from the killer usually. York runs toward danger, and that's a refreshing change of pace for a horror game. The ending of Deadly Premonition has a good payoff, and you'll definitely want to stay until the end. Perhaps Deadly Premonition's story has become laughable, however it does have a heart, and many game stories pale in comparison. The gameplay of Deadly Premonition can be divided into two parts: the investigation and the combat. During the investigation sections, York goes around the town of Greenvale drinking coffee, having snacks, and interviewing people. You'll do this mostly by driving, which is very stiff and slow. York needs to both sleep and eat, which, if not monitored, decreases his health. Also, certain characters and events cannot be accessed without specific timing and weather. Sleep can move a long time, which will then allow York to find out useful information or get new items. There are some side activities like fishing that are a good distraction. I have to say though that the fishing did feel like it was trolling me at one point. No joke, it took me like 30 minutes to get through this section. During the combat, York's transported to the Red World. These sections are like a third-person corridor shooter. These are linear segments that have quite a lot of enemies to mow down. The gameplay is like a less defined Resident Evil 4. The crosshairs are very sensitive, and the most useful weapons are the melee items. These are not super durable though, so you'll want to do some side missions to get a weapon with infinite durability. As a side note, get the radio, which also allows you to fast travel, and the infinite pipe, an indestructible melee weapon, ASAP. I've made a guide for this, which you can find in a link below. During some of the missions in the Red World, the Raincoat Killer will chase you. These sections are tedium. You have to flick the left thumbstick left and right to run, and enter button prompts to dodge or jump. I have no idea how anyone played these sections during the development of the game and said, yeah, this is fun. Deadly Premonition has some light puzzling, but that's about it. While the gameplay isn't all that challenging, it works well. The only time that this falls short is during the boss battles in the late game. These fights are gunplay heavy, and the cracks really start to show. Luckily, the boss fights aren't too demanding. Deadly Premonition is a mixed bag. Low-resolution textures, stiff animations, and oversaturated colors give the player an impression of a low-budget game. The mirrors work. I know this is a small touch, but non-reflective mirrors are a big pet peeve of mine in video games. While there are some disappointing aspects of the visuals for a game released in 2010, there is something charming about Deadly Premonition. The characters in particular exude individuality. At first, they don't seem terribly original. Standard, generic American fare. You know, leather jackets, cowboy boots, blue jeans. Of course, there's always an exception, and that's Harry Stewart, with his gas mask and wheelchair. He's the only indication that this game is in fact Japanese. One of the ways that the characters show their personality is through their repetitive movements. For instance, when York is thinking, he taps his chest, or when the owner of the milk bar, Keith Ingram, gets excited, he pumps his fist, because he's a rocker.
Road trips. The kids love them, so we let them take them out every once in a while. You know, for a little quality time with the missus.
While some of these missions feel exaggerated, they also make the character more memorable. The enemies you'll face in the Red World are interesting, but there isn't much variety. You'll face the same handful of ghoulies over and over. The bosses are much more interesting, but they too are few and far between. The Raincoat Killer deserves special mention, mostly due to his axe. He drags it behind him, shooting sparks everywhere, making his already imposing stature feel even more intimidating. There are a few occasions that York will have to hide from the killer, then the perspective switches to the Raincoat Killers looking for York. I've never seen something like this, and it did feel unique. As York travels Greenvale, the town has two modes, when it's foggy and when it's rainy. I love when the fog rolls over the trees and mountains. The oversaturated sunlight feels welcoming. The whole town gives you a sense of an idyllic, small community. The rain makes everything in the town slow down. The townsfolk don't go out in the rain, and there is a narrative reason for that. This is a great time to explore and do side missions. The one thing that I do struggle with in Deadly Premonition is the frame rate. It's all over the place. I'd love to see this game get a remaster to address some of these performance issues. The map and UI can be cumbersome as well. The map rotates based on where York is positioned. You also can't zoom out to see the full map at any given time. You can only see a certain section. You can't set waypoints, making navigation difficult. Print out a map and get the radio. This will make your quality of life vastly improve in Greenvale. Deadly Premonition nails the spooky end of sound design. The enemies York faces do a good job of sounding freaky. Even when there are no zombies around, York can still hear them, always leaving you in a state of unease. The guns, on the other hand, are meek by comparison. It sounds like they're undermixed. These sound issues continue onto the world map. The cars have a very unappealing sound that I would honestly turn down the volume for. The music in Deadly Premonition is surprisingly catchy. The opening track has some nice layered echoey guitars that draw you in. During the more suspenseful sections, there's an almost experimental jazz approach that feels chaotic, much like the mind of the killer. Then there's happier tracks that make you feel like you're in the countryside, carefree. While the OST is eclectic, it all fits together into a cohesive piece, much like many other aspects of the game.
At the estimated time of her death, it was still raining, but you can still see tear marks on her cheeks.
The voice acting in Deadly Premonition is amazing. At first it feels like the characters are stilted and even trying to sound like a B-movie. As you play through, the voice actors grow on you, and they're surprisingly good at transporting the viewer into the scene. The one thing that I don't understand is why the voices have so much reverb. Probably my favorite characters are Thomas and York. The voice actor for Thomas just fits the character so well. York is excellent at sounding self-important, yet still kind. I love that he always introduces himself, over and over, even if the person doesn't ask his name.
A computer room? In a hospital?
Nice to meet you, Mr. FBI agent. The computer room is where our employees share a computer.
Very nice to meet you, too. I'm FBI Special Agent Francis York Morgan. But how did you know I was FBI?
Easy. None of the police in this town wear cologne.
George, which do you prefer, mustard or hot sauce?
You didn't come all the way to my house just to ask me that.
The Director's Cut of Deadly Premonition can be purchased for about $25, which is a bit high for a last-gen game. The price is probably due to the meme culture that surrounds it and the passionate fan base. I'd still say that's a fair price though. If you'd like to pay a little less, the Xbox 360 version is cheaper. You don't get some of the content from the Director's Cut though.
Kind of like the bonus footage on a DVD. I hope it's worth watching. Don't you agree, Zach?
It took me about 14 hours to complete the game. Once you've completed the game, there's some nice post-game features, as well as extra difficulties to play. The difficulty on your first playthrough is quite low. I only died a few times and none of those deaths were during combat. While I can see why Deadly Premonition has become a cult classic, I don't think it's so bad it's good. I view Deadly Premonition as a game so ambitious that it struggles to carry the weight of its own ideas. This is Zach with Spooky Tanuki Games. Please remember that a like, a comment, or subscribe means a lot to me and of course the channel. Enjoy.
Mr. Morgan, do you want a refill?
Yes. Thank you.
Is the coffee that good, Mr. Morgan?
Coffee is a vital, investigative tool. I know exactly what to do now.